The air tastes like promises and dust. It smells of dried lavender, bitter cinchona bark, and the sharp, metallic tang of bloodroot hanging in braided bunches from the ceiling beams. A single sunbeam, thick with dancing motes, cuts through the gloom of the shop, illuminating the hypnotic swirl of a green tincture in a glass bottle on the counter. It's a moment so perfectly still, you could almost believe the world outside wasn't holding its breath, waiting for a war. This is the precipice of revolution, a single, quiet moment before the world changes forever. Tonight, we're going to be caught in the crossfire of ideals, standing between two giants of American history as they wage a war of words that will set the stage for a war of bullets. It's easy to look at history from the safety of our time and see heroes and villains, clear choices and obvious outcomes. But for the people living it, it was just a Tuesday. A confusing, terrifying, and utterly life-altering Tuesday where your neighbor could become your enemy overnight. Hi, Guy. Tonight we delve into the tumultuous year of 1776, experiencing the American Revolution like never before. You're there, amidst the swirling dust and whispered secrets of Philadelphia. You probably won't survive this, at least not unscathed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps the channel find other people who appreciate these quiet, late-night journeys. In the comments, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where our little community gathers. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are Rhoda Wright, and you are monumentally bored. The bell above the apothecary door hasn't so much as trembled in an hour. Your father is upstairs, likely asleep in his chair, a medical journal resting on his chest. And you are left with the endlessly fascinating task of grinding sassafras root into a fine, reddish powder. Thump scrape. Thump scrape. The rhythm of the heavy stone pestle and the marble mortar is the only sound, a dull heartbeat in the sleepy afternoon. You lean your cheek against the cool, dark wood of a display cabinet, watching the dust motes in that sunbeam. They're like tiny, silent rebels, you think, each one charting its own chaotic course, free from the tyranny of the broom. You, on the other hand, are very much under the tyranny of the sassafras root. Your father calls this apprenticeship the shaping of your character. You call it a creative punishment for being born. He speaks of the noble art of healing, of balancing the humors, of serving the community. You dream of being a theatrical performer, or perhaps a ship's captain, or even a professional napper. Anything but this. The stubborn streak your father so often laments is currently locked in a silent, epic battle with a particularly fibrous piece of root. You refuse to give up, pressing down with all your weight, your tongue sticking out from the corner of your mouth in concentration. If you push any harder, Rhoda, that pestle will go straight through the counter. And then, what will your father say? Quote, you jump, a puff of sassafras dust erupting from the mortar like a tiny, fragrant volcano. Eleazar Cox stands in the doorway to the back room, a basket of clean linens balanced on her hip. She's your cousin, twice removed, and has been the maidservant here since you were both children. She has a way of moving so quietly, you're convinced she simply materializes where she's needed most, usually to stop you from doing something foolish. It was a calculated risk, Eleazar, you say, trying to sound much more scientific and professional than you feel. I was testing the tensile strength of the marble. She raises a single, unimpressed eyebrow. Eleazar doesn't have time for your nonsense. While you're dreaming of naval command, she's managing the entire household, ensuring there's food on the table, and keeping your father's accounts in some semblance of order. She is responsibility personified. You are a work in progress. The only thing you're testing is my patience, she says, though the corner of her mouth twitches. She sets the basket down and starts methodically refolding a piece of linen that has dared to be wrinkled. There's a man asking for you out back. Says he has a delivery. This is new. Deliveries usually come through the front. A man? What sort of man? The sort who looks like he chews on nails for breakfast, she mutters, her focus entirely on her folding, and spits rust. Curiosity, a far more effective motivator than duty, propels you from behind the counter. You wipe your dusty hands on your apron and slip through the back room, a cluttered space smelling of camphor and drying herbs, and out into the narrow, cobbled alley. The man is just as Eleazar described. He's built like a barrel, with a grim, square face and hands that look like they could forge iron. He leans against the brick wall, arms crossed over his chest. regarding you with an unnervingly steady gaze. This is Micah Walker. You know him by reputation, a smith by trade, but it's whispered he's a master forger of passes, a man who can get you through any checkpoint for the right price. He is a man of absolutes, of black and white, with no room for the messy grays you find so comfortable. "You're the right boy?" he grunts. His voice is low and gravelly, like stones grinding together. "I am Rhoda Wright, yes," you say, trying to stand a little taller. "Son of the proprietor." Quote. He doesn't seem impressed. He pushes himself off the wall and shoves a small, cloth-wrapped bundle into your hands. It's surprisingly heavy. For your father, from a concerned party. You fumble with the knot. A concerned party? What does that mean? Micah's eyes narrow. He looks past you, into the shop, then back. It means some men are patriots, and some are cowards hiding behind talk of reconciliation and peace. The men in that Congress Hall need to make up their minds. This is for when they do. Quote. His honesty is as blunt and unyielding as his physique. You finally get the bundle open. Inside are 3 heavy lead bars. Your stomach clenches. This isn't for medicine. Lead is for one thing. Bullets. I don't understand, you stammer, the weight of the metal suddenly feeling cold and sinister in your hands. My father is an apothecary. He heals people. Every man has to choose a side, boy, Micah says, his voice dropping even lower. Your father's shop is a good, neutral place. Respected. People come and go. People talk. But neutrality is a luxury we can no longer afford. Tell him to keep it safe. More will be coming. Quote. Before you can ask another question, he turns and stalks down the alley, his heavy boots echoing off the bricks until he disappears around the corner, leaving you standing there with the cold, hard reality of rebellion in your hands. You quickly rewrap the lead and hurry back inside, your heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. Eleazar looks up from her linens, her eyes immediately finding the bundle in your hands. Her expression is tight with worry. Rhoda, what is that? Nothing, you say too quickly. Just supplies. You shove the lead bars under the counter, behind a large crate of wintergreen leaves. Your hands are shaking. The sleepy, boring afternoon is gone, replaced by a sharp, tingling anxiety. Micah Walker's words echo in your head. Every man has to choose a side. You've always thought of the arguments filling the city's taverns and pamphlets as noise, the business of important men in wigs. It had nothing to do with you, grinding roots in your father's shop. But now, that noise had a weight. It was heavy and made of lead. The bell above the shop door finally jingles, a sharp, angry sound that makes you both flinch. 2 men stride in, bringing the heated energy of the street with them. They are deep in argument, their voices filling the small space, chasing away the last of the quiet. You recognize them instantly from the political cartoons and broadsheets plastered all over the city. The first is short, stout, and radiating a furious energy. His face is flushed, and he gestures sharply with one hand as he speaks. John Adams, the delegate from Massachusetts, the fiery voice for independence. The second is taller, thinner, and more elegantly dressed. His expression is one of pained, weary frustration. John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, the author of the Olive Branch Petition, a man desperately clinging to the hope of reconciliation with the crown. And I tell you, sir, your so-called prudence is nothing more than cowardice dressed in finery. Adams barks, his voice a cannonball. While you dither and draft your polite little letters, men are dying. Blood has been spilt at Lexington, at Concord. To speak of peace now is to spit on their graves. Quote, and to speak of war is to condemn thousands more to an early one, Dickinson retorts, his voice strained but sharp. He stops at the counter, placing a hand on the polished wood as if to steady himself. He looks pale, and a faint sheen of sweat is on his brow. You are blinded by passion, Master Adams. You mistake fervor for wisdom. A break with the king is a leap into an abyss from which there is no return. We would be a nation of orphans, at the mercy of every European predator. You and Eleazar are frozen, 2 statues behind the counter. This isn't just a political debate. It feels raw, personal, dangerous. The air in the shop is electric, charged with the clash of their convictions. Adams scoffs, a sound of pure derision. I would rather be an orphan in a house of my own making than a pampered slave in the home of a tyrant. Your caution will be our damnation, Dickinson. History will remember you as the man who held the door for the hangman. Quote, Dickinson winces as if struck. He turns his gaze from Adams and finally seems to notice you. His eyes are tired, full of a deep, profound sorrow. Forgive the intrusion, young man, he says, his voice suddenly quiet, almost a whisper. My throat from the endless debate. I require a honey and licorice tonic, and perhaps something for a headache. Quote, You stare at him, speechless. John Dickinson, the great orator, is asking you for a simple cough remedy. You look from his pained face to Adams's furious one, then back again. The fate of a nation is being decided by men who get sore throats and headaches, just like anyone else. Micah's words come back to you. Cowards hiding behind talk of reconciliation. Patriots. You glance at Eleazar. Her face is a mask of careful neutrality, but her hands are clenched tightly in the folds of her apron. You are just a boy, an apprentice, stubborn, naive, funny. But in this moment, standing between these two great, opposing forces, with a secret cache of lead hidden beneath your counter, you feel a profound shift deep within you. The boredom is gone. The daydreams have vanished. For the first time, you understand that history isn't something that happens to other people in other places. It's happening right here, in your shop, to you. And the urge to simply do what you're told, to stay out of it, is suddenly at war with a fierce, unfamiliar feeling. A stubborn need to understand, to choose, to act. You are no longer just an observer. You are part of it. Your fingers, suddenly clumsy, fumble with the jar of licorice root. You scoop a measure into a small pot, add a generous dollop of honey, and splash in boiled water, your movements jerky and uncertain. The air is still thick with the ghosts of their words. Cowardice, tyrant, hangman. Eleazar stands beside you, her presence a silent, urgent command to hurry. She wants these men, and the dangerous ideas they carry, out of your quiet shop. John Adams, seemingly having exhausted his patience for debate, gives a sharp, disgusted snort. He turns on his heel without another word and storms out, the bell on the door jangling furiously in his wake. He leaves behind a vacuum, a sudden, ringing silence. John Dickinson does not seem to notice his adversary's departure. He leans heavily on the counter, his eyes closed for a moment. You slide the warm tonic towards him. His hand trembles slightly as he picks it up. He takes a slow, grateful sip, the simple act seeming to cost him a great deal of effort. His gaze lifts and meets yours. For a fleeting second, the great statesman is gone, and you see only a tired, sick man, burdened by a weight you can't possibly comprehend. Thank you, son, he murmurs, his voice raspy. He places a few coins on the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. Then, with a weary nod to you, and a slighter one to Eleazar, he too is gone, swallowed by the afternoon sun. The bell gives a soft, almost melancholy chime this time. Eleazar lets out a breath she seems to have been holding since they walked in. Good riddance, she whispers, snatching the coins from the counter as if they might be contaminated. Men like that, they'll bring ruin down on all of us with their shouting. You don't answer. You stare at the empty space where they stood, the lingering scent of their wet wool coats, and the electric charge of their argument still hanging in the air. You think of the lead bars hidden beneath your feet. Patriots and cowards. The world, which had always seemed a fairly straightforward place, was suddenly splitting down the middle, and your father's shop was sitting right on top of the crack. A few weeks later, the crack becomes a chasm. The city erupts. It starts as a low murmur, a current pulling people from their homes and workshops into the streets. Then the sound swells, becoming a roar that vibrates through the floorboards of the shop. And then the bell begins to ring. Not the polite jingle of your shop door, but the great resonant peal of the State House bell. It's a sound you've heard before, marking time or calling the assembly, but never like this. Today it doesn't just ring, it proclaims. It's a wild, joyful, terrifying sound, a brazen clang of iron on iron that seems to shake the very sky. Eleazar tries to stop you, her hand grabbing your arm. Stay inside, Rhoda. It's not safe. There's a mob. Quote. But her warning is lost to the din. The stubborn curiosity that has so often led you into trouble propels you out the door. You're swept into a river of people flowing towards the State House yard. The air is humid and smells of sweat, horse manure, and an intoxicating whiff of rebellion. You are pressed shoulder to shoulder with merchants, dock workers, apprentices like yourself, and finely dressed ladies fanning themselves in the heat. In the yard, a man stands on a high wooden platform, his voice booming over the crowd as he reads from a large sheet of parchment. You can only catch phrases, carried on the wind. All men are created equal, certain unalienable rights. These united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. Each phrase is met with a roar from the crowd. Men throw their hats in the air. Women weep with joy. When the reader finishes, a wave of pure, unrestrained jubilation crashes over the city. The bell, the great Liberty Bell, rings and rings and rings. Its voice the sound of a cord being definitively cut. For a moment, you are caught up in it completely. You cheer until your throat is raw, a grin plastered on your face. This is it. This is history. It feels glorious. The crowd becomes a single, hydra-headed creature, surging from the yard. It moves with a singular purpose towards the State House itself, where a group of men are climbing onto the roof. With ropes and crowbars, they begin to tear at the large, carved, wooden crest of the king's arms. With a great groan of splintering wood, the lion and the unicorn are pried loose and sent crashing to the ground below. The crowd descends upon it, hacking it to pieces with axes and glee. Later that night, they will pile the gilded fragments onto a bonfire and burn them in a defiant, sparkling pyre. But as you stand on the edge of the chaos, watching the fire leap into the twilight sky, a sliver of cold fear pierces the warmth of the celebration. You overhear two men standing near you, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. A brave day, one says, his voice thick with emotion. Aye, says the other, his gaze fixed on the fire. But King George has more than just wooden lions. He has ships, he has cannons, and he has an army that does not take kindly to being defied. Quote, the first man's celebratory mood deflates. The British will come. It is not a question. They are already at New York, the second man says grimly. This declaration, it is not an end. It is the beginning. God help us all. The glorious feeling begins to curdle in your stomach. Further down the street, in the deep shadows cast by a tavern, you see a small, tight knot of gentlemen. They are not celebrating. Their faces are grim, their conversation low and urgent. You recognize the broad, confident figure of John Hancock. He isn't looking at the bonfire. He's speaking to the men around him, his voice a low, serious rumble that cuts through the festive noise. You move a little closer, hiding behind a water barrel, straining to hear. Is one thing to declare it, Hancock is saying, his hand chopping the air for emphasis. It is another thing entirely to win it. The army needs muskets. It needs powder. It needs shoes. A signature on a piece of parchment does not stop a bayonet charge. This joy will be short-lived if we cannot supply our men in the field. Quote, his words land like stones in your gut. Muskets, powder, lead. The secret weight under your counter feels 1,000 times heavier. Hancock's gaze sweeps over the street, past the cheering crowds, as if he's already seeing the smoke of battle, the lines of wounded men. His is the face of a man who understands the butcher's bill for this glorious day. In the days that follow, the city changes. The initial euphoria bleeds away, leaving behind a nervous, volatile tension. Philadelphia is a city at war with itself. The lines Micah Walker spoke of are no longer invisible. They are drawn on walls and in faces. The words patriot and Tory are now weapons, hurled in the street like stones. On an errand to deliver a poultice to a house near the docks, you see it everywhere. Mr. Albright's print shop, which always carried papers sympathetic to the crown, has had its windows smashed, the glass littering the street like jagged ice. On the wall, someone has scrawled, "Damn all Tories," in smeared black paint. Further on, a recruiting officer for the new Continental Army has set up a table outside a tavern, a drum beating a steady, insistent rhythm. You watch a young cooper, a boy you know from the market, sign his name on the enlistment roll. His friends clap him on the back, but you see the tremor in his hand as he accepts a shilling from the officer. His face is a confusing mask of pride and sheer terror. You pass a group of Quakers, their plain, gray clothing, a stark contrast to the colorful chaos of the city. They walk with their eyes downcast, their silence a form of protest against this violent new world being born around them. They are caught in the middle, their pacifism seen as disloyalty by the fervent patriots. The division even touches your customers. Mrs. Gable, a wealthy merchant's wife who has always been kind to you, now rushes into the shop, her face veiled. She buys her tinctures without her usual friendly chatter, her eyes darting towards the door as if she expects to be condemned for simply being here. Her husband, you've heard whispered, still speaks of loyalty to the king, and their family is now treated like a contagion. Later, you see a man you recognize from church being heckled by a group of apprentices. They call him a loyalist coward, telling him to go back to England. The man just clutches his hat to his chest and hurries on, his face pale and tight. He isn't a fire-breathing Tory. He's just a man who is scared, a man whose entire world has been upended, a man who is now an enemy because he cannot bring himself to cheer for a war. You return to the apothecary, the bell above the door sounding muted and tired. The familiar smells of lavender and cinchona bark feel like a comfort, a link to the simpler, boring world of a few weeks ago. Eliezer is there, grimly counting out jars. "Flour is up again," she says, without looking at you. "And Mrs. Gable said the king's soldiers have landed on Staten Island by the thousand. What will we do if they come here, Rhoda?" Her fear is practical. It's about food and safety and the four walls of the shop. Your fear is something different. It's formless and confusing. It's the weight of John Hancock's warning, the sight of the cooper's trembling hand, the memory of John Dickinson's exhausted face. You find yourself standing behind the counter, right over the spot where the lead bars are hidden. You can almost feel their cold, dense presence through the floorboards. The echo of the Liberty Bell is still in your ears, but it no longer sounds purely joyful. It sounds like a challenge. It sounds like Micah Walker's gravelly voice. Every man has to choose a side. The choice is no longer an abstract debate for men in wigs. It is here, in the smashed glass of a print shop, in the rising price of flour, in the secret cache of lead waiting beneath your feet. And you, Rhoda Wright, apprentice apothecary and dreamer, are standing right in the middle of it. The choice is not a choice at all, you realize. It was made for you the moment Michael Walker's lead bars landed in your hands. It was made when the bell rang out for independence. It's a choice that has been gathering momentum like a storm rolling in from the coast. And now, all you can do is stand in its path. The storm breaks just a week later. The news comes from the north, a frantic, desperate trickle at first, then a flood. The British have not just landed at New York. They have crushed the fledgling Continental Army at Long Island. The stories that filter into Philadelphia are nightmarish. They are whispered in the shop by customers who come for laudanum to soothe their nerves, their faces ashen. They tell of whole regiments of boys from Maryland and Delaware, barely old enough to shave, charging a wall of British bayonets and Hessian fire, holding the line just long enough for the rest of the army to escape. They talk of a fighting retreat across the East River, conducted in darkness and fog, a miracle of desperation. The glorious victory you had imagined, the quick and noble triumph, evaporates like morning mist. This is not a glorious game. It is a bloody, desperate slog. War is no longer a debate between men in wigs. It is a butcher, and its appetite is endless. The city, once so sure of itself, holds its breath. The fear is a physical thing now, a sour taste in the back of your throat. Every church bell that rings makes people jump, their eyes turning north, expecting to see the red-coated vanguard marching down High Street. Philadelphia transforms. The city sheds its skin of commerce and dons the rough burlap of war. The rhythmic thump of your pestle is now drowned out by 100 other, more urgent sounds. The constant, rhythmic tramp of militia drilling in every open square, their officers barking commands that are still uncertain. The sharp, percussive crack of hammers from the shipyards, where they aren't just repairing merchant vessels but frantically trying to build a navy. Carpenters, once busy crafting fine furniture, now construct chevaux de frise, massive, iron-tipped wooden frames to be sunk in the Delaware River, designed to rip the hulls out of British warships. Your errands around the city become journeys into this new, grim reality. One afternoon, your father sends you to deliver a tincture of valerian root to a sailmaker's wife. As you pass the State House yard, you see a gathering of women. They are sitting on the grass in the shadow of the great building. But this is no social call. They are surrounded by piles of old linen, shirts, sheets, tablecloths. With determined, focused movements, they scrape the fabric with knives and their own fingernails, creating soft mounds of lint. It's for packing wounds. You watch a woman, her own hands raw and red, carefully folding a strip of linen into a tight bandage roll. She looks up and her eyes meet yours. There's no fear in them, only a cold, hard resolve. She gives you a curt nod, as if you are both soldiers in the same army, and returns to her work. The war effort demands everything. It demands the bells from the church steeples, which are taken down to be melted into cannon. It demands the lead weights from the city's windows and clocks. One morning, 2 men from the Committee of Safety arrive at the shop. They are polite but firm. Your father leads them to the back, and you hear the clatter of weights being removed from his precious regulator clock, the one he uses for timing distillations. The sudden silence from the corner where it stood is unnerving, a constant, steady heartbeat of your life now gone. Your own role begins to shift. You are still an apprentice, but your tasks are no longer about grinding sassafras for novelty's sake. The Continental Congress issues a request, an urgent plea for all apothecaries to supply the Army's medical chests. Your father, who has always kept his politics close to his chest, agrees without hesitation. "They are still our sons, Rhoda," he says, his voice quiet but firm. "Whatever we may think of their leaders, they are our sons, and they will bleed." Quote, "The shop becomes a hive of activity. You and Eleazar work from dawn until well past dusk. The work is grueling. You spend hours mixing ointments in huge batches, turpentine and beeswax, a foul-smelling but effective salve. You roll hundreds upon hundreds of pills, your fingers stained with gentian and rhubarb. Eleazar, her face a mask of grim efficiency, tears old sheets into perfect uniform bandage rolls, her movements far more precise and practiced than the women in the yard. She organizes the supplies with a general's command, labeling jars and boxing up vials. Her earlier fear has been forged into a sharp-edged purpose. "We're nearly out of cinchona," she announces one evening, her voice flat with exhaustion as she makes a note in a ledger. "The fevers will be bad in the camps. What will they do without it?" Quote, "The question hangs in the air. It's a question of life and death, decided by the contents of a single crate. This is your new reality. One sweltering afternoon, you are tasked with delivering a small crate of supplies to a makeshift hospital set up in a Quaker meeting house. The cart rattles over the cobblestones, and you feel a strange sense of importance, your stubborn nature now channeled into a singular goal. Get these medicines where they need to go. You pull the cart around to the back of the building, where a surgeon's assistant, a young man with bloodstains up to his elbows, signs for the delivery. "God's blessings on you," he says, not even looking at you as he hefts the crate. "We lost 3 men to the flux this morning alone. This might keep a few more of them alive." Quote, as he turns to go inside, the door swings open and you catch a glimpse of the scene within. Rows of straw pallets on the floor, each one occupied. The air that drifts out is thick, with the smell of unwashed bodies, sickness, and something metallic and sweet you recognize as blood. You hear a low moan, a man crying out for his mother. The door swings shut, cutting off the sight, but the sound, the smell, it's seared into your brain. You stand frozen for a long moment, the afternoon sun feeling cold on your skin. These were the men who had survived the battle, only to face a slower, more agonizing enemy in the camps. On the way back to the shop, you take a different route, one that leads you past Micah Walker's forge. The place is a volcano of activity. The rhythmic clang of the hammer is relentless. You slow your cart, peering into the cavernous, fire-lit space. Walker is there, a leather apron tied around his thick waist, his bare arms corded with muscle and glistening with sweat. He is not making horseshoes or iron gates. He is hammering a glowing piece of iron around a steel mandrel, shaping it into the socket of a bayonet. 2 other smiths work beside him, and a boy, not much older than you, operates the huge bellows, his face smudged with soot. Racks along the wall hold their finished work, dozens of newly forged bayonets and wicked-looking polearms, their sharpened points gleaming in the firelight. Suddenly, Walker looks up. His eyes, burning bright in the gloom of the forge, lock onto yours. He stops hammering, the sudden silence deafening. He wipes a hand across his brow, leaving a black smear, and walks to the wide entrance of the forge, blocking the light. "Rights, boy," he grunts. His gaze flicks to your empty cart. "Delivering your poultices and potions?" There's no malice in his voice, just a blunt, matter-of-fact judgment. "The army needs medicine as much as it needs weapons," you retort, your voice coming out stronger than you expected. The sight inside the hospital is still fresh in your mind. Micah looks you up and down, a flicker of something. Maybe not respect, but acknowledgement in his eyes. A bayonet stops a man from getting sick in the first place, by killing the man who'd give him the disease. He spits a stream of tobacco juice onto the street, narrowly missing your shoe. The lead I gave you, your father put it to use yet? Quote, "It's being kept safe," you stammer. The lie tastes like ash in your mouth. He gives a short, humorless laugh. "Don't keep it safe for too long, boy. The redcoats won't wait for you to make up your mind." He turns without another word and goes back to his anvil. The hammering begins again, each blow a punctuation mark to his words. You urge your cart forward, your heart thumping in time with the hammer blows. You are doing important work. You are saving lives. But Walker's words, his absolute brutal clarity, unnerve you. He sees the world as a simple, violent equation. And as you make your way back through the streets of your new grim city, a city of women scraping lint and smiths forging bayonets, you begin to fear that he might be right. The quiet, boring world you once knew is gone forever, burned away in the fires of a forge and the fevers of a war camp. The rhythmic clang of Micah's hammer follows you all the way back to the shop, a ghostly echo that seems to have permanently lodged itself behind your ribs. It's the new heartbeat of Philadelphia. You push the cart into the alley and step back into the apothecary, the familiar scent of dried herbs feeling less like a comfort and more like a flimsy shield against the harsh, iron-stenched reality outside. Eleazar looks up from a ledger, her brow furrowed with the grim arithmetic of dwindling supplies and rising costs. "The sailmaker's wife sends her thanks," you say, your voice sounding hollow in the quiet shop. She also said her youngest boy is thinking of enlisting. Eleazar makes a sharp, unhappy sound in her throat. Another one. Soon there'll be no one left but old men and undertakers. She dips her quill in the inkpot with a frustrated jab. "And us, I suppose, rolling pills for ghosts." Her words are bleak, but you can't disagree. The patriotic fervor that had filled the streets just weeks ago now feels brittle, stretched thin over a deep well of fear. You move behind the counter, your feet finding their usual place, right over the hidden lead. The floorboards don't feel any different, but you swear you can sense the cold, inert weight beneath them. A bayonet stops a man from getting sick. You pick up the heavy pestle, its familiar weight a poor anchor in the swirling unease of your thoughts. You begin to grind bone set, the scrape and thump a familiar, mindless rhythm. Scrape, thump, a medicine for fevers, a medicine for the men the bayonets don't stop. The bell above the door jangles, not with the furious energy of a mob, or the timid haste of a nervous customer, but with the heavy, deliberate tread of men with purpose. You look up, your hand stilling in the mortar. It is them again, John Adams and John Dickinson. But they are not the same men who argued here before. The earlier fire and frustration have been tempered into something harder, sharper. Adams's face is a thundercloud, his stocky frame coiled with a grim, restless energy. Dickinson looks older than he did just weeks ago. The weariness in his eyes has deepened into a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, yet his back is ramrod straight, his chin held with a defiant stiffness. They do not seem to be arguing as they enter. They are wrapped in a charged, volatile silence that is somehow more menacing than their shouts. They stop in the middle of the shop, two opposing poles of gravity, bending the very air around them. Eleazar freezes, her quill hovering over the ledger, her face becoming a carefully blank mask. "It is a strategic insanity, John," Dickinson says finally, his voice low and taut, stripped of its previous oratorical flourish. "It is the voice of a man pushed to his limit. To fortify that island, to place the very flower of our army with their backs to a river, at the mercy of the world's greatest navy. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter pen of your own design." Adams's head snaps toward him, his eyes blazing. "It was a necessary stand. We had to show them we would not simply cede the ground." Washington is a general, not a magician. He works with the men and materials we give him. And what have you given him, Dickinson? Vacillation. Doubt. You and your cautious brethren in the Congress have been a millstone around this army's neck from the beginning. Quote, "I gave him a caution born of reality," Dickinson's voice rises, cracking with strain. "A reality you refuse to see. You speak of glorious battle, but I speak of the 1,500 men lost or captured. Good men. Men from my own state. Did their necessary stand feel glorious to them as they were run through with Hessian steel, or packed into the floating hell of a prison ship. Quote, "You stop grinding. The pestle rests, heavy and cold, in your hand. This is different. This is not about ideals anymore. This is about blood. Real blood, spilled just a few days' ride from where you stand. You can almost smell it again. The memory of the hospital, the sickness, the moans, the despair. War demands sacrifice," Adams thunders, taking a step forward. The bottles on the shelves seem to vibrate with the force of his voice. "You cannot wage it with one hand while holding out the other for a peace that will never come. Their king has declared us rebels. To him we are traitors to be hanged, not prodigal sons to be welcomed home. Every letter you write, every speech you make urging reconciliation, it is a poison you pour in the ears of our soldiers. It tells them their fight is perhaps pointless, their deaths perhaps in vain. It is you who are the author of despair, sir, not I." Quote, "And you are the author of Orphans and Widows," Dickinson retorts, his pale face flushed with a rare, hot anger. "You would burn the entire house down to rid it of a leaky roof. You speak of victory, but you have not considered the cost. What good is a victory that leaves us a nation of ruins? A generation of cripples, indebted to the French or the Spanish for a century to come. Is that the liberty you promise, to trade one master for another? I promise a chance." Adams jabs a finger at Dickinson's chest. "A chance to be our own masters. It is a chance that must be bought with blood and iron, yes. It is a terrible price, and it sickens me as much as it does you. But I would rather pay it than live on my knees. You are so afraid of the cost of the fight that you would sell us back into bondage for a pittance." Quote, "You look from one man to the other. You see Adams's righteous fire and recognize the same defiant spirit that burned the king's arms in the street. You hear his words, blood and iron, and you think of Micah Walker at his forge, hammering out bayonets with a terrible, focused clarity. Then you look at Dickinson. You see the haunted look in his eyes, and you think of the women scraping lint for bandages, of the surgeon's assistant with blood to his elbows, of the men dying of flux in a crowded room. They are both right, and they are both terrifying. Eleazar makes a small, almost imperceptible movement, placing a hand flat on the counter as if to steady herself. Her knuckles are white. She wants them gone. She wants this clash of worlds out of her neatly ordered shop. But you are mesmerized. You are standing at the very epicenter of the revolution. Not the glorious flag-waving part, but the ugly, agonizing, soul-tearing part. This is the debate that must be happening inside every thinking person in the city. How much is this new idea of a country worth? What is the acceptable price? 1,000 men? 10,000? Your own life? The life of your cousin? Dickinson seems to deflate, the anger draining out of him, leaving only the profound weariness behind. He shakes his head slowly, a look of deep, personal sorrow on his face. "You do not sicken of it, John. You thrive on it. You are a creature of the storm. Some of us, however, must think of how to rebuild when the storm has passed." Quote, he turns away from Adams, his gaze sweeping vacantly over the shop before it lands on you. He seems to look right through you for a moment, his thoughts 1,000 miles away on a bloody field in New York. "I require," he begins, his voice raspy, "a dram of your father's strongest sedative, tincture of poppy." Laudanum, the request hangs in the air, a stark admission of a pain too deep for a simple headache tonic. Adams watches him, his jaw tight, his own fury seemingly spent, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He gives a curt, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if disgusted by this display of weakness. Without another word, he turns and exits the shop. The bell gives a sharp, judgmental clink. You move automatically, your hands finding the familiar dark blue bottle. You carefully measure the thick, dark liquid into a small vial, your fingers feeling clumsy. Laudanum to dull the senses, to quiet the mind, to grant a few hours of escape from a reality that has become unbearable. It is a medicine of retreat, of surrender. You slide the vial across the counter. Dickinson's hand closes around it. His fingers are cold. He looks at you, and this time, he truly sees you. He sees a boy behind a counter, caught in the crossfire of history. A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crosses his face. "See that you do not mistake the storm for the sunrise, young man," he says, his voice a near whisper. He places a coin on the counter and turns, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an immense weight, and walks out into the street. The bell chimes softly, a melancholy sigh. For a long moment there is only silence, broken by the distant, rhythmic clang of a hammer from a forge. You stare at the coin he left. It's not just a piece of silver. It feels like a payment for a secret you were not meant to know. Poison, Eleazar whispers, her voice venomous. She snatches the coin from the counter. They are all poison. The loud ones and the quiet ones. They'll kill us all with their convictions. Quote, you don't answer. You look down at your hands. One moment they mix a tonic to heal a fever. The next they dispense a drug to numb a soul. All while you stand guard over a secret cache of lead meant for killing. Heal, numb, kill. They are all just different tasks in this new world. Micah was right. You can't just be an apothecary anymore. You can't just be a boy grinding roots. The world is splitting apart, and you can no longer stand in the middle. The debate between Adams and Dickinson wasn't just about them. It was about you. Do you forge the bayonet or do you scrape the lint? Do you embrace the terrible clarity of the storm, or do you try to tend to the wounded in its wake? You look down at the bone set in the mortar, the half-ground herb for fevers. Slowly, deliberately, you pick up the pestle. Its weight feels different now. Heavier. You are no longer just following your father's instructions. You are making a choice. With a steady hand, you begin to grind again. Thumb scrape, thumb scrape. It is a small act, a quiet one. But in the ringing silence of the shop, it feels like an answer. For now, the answer you have chosen, this quiet commitment to healing, is tested sooner than you could ever imagine. The pleas from the Congress for medical supplies become more desperate. The news from New York grows darker. General Washington's army, a patchwork of militia and a few seasoned regulars, is digging in on Long Island, preparing to face the full might of the British Empire. They are desperately short on everything, especially the medicines you, Eleazar, and your father have been preparing day and night. Your father, his face etched with a gravity you've never seen, makes the decision. A large wagon must be sent, loaded with every pill, salve, and tincture you can spare. He cannot go. The city depends on his shop. Eleazar cannot be spared, so it is you. You will accompany the wagon, driven by a stern-faced carter named Silas, to deliver the supplies directly to the Army's Medical Corps in Brooklyn. You protest, not out of fear, but out of a sense of absurdity. You are a boy who dreams of the stage, not a quartermaster. You know what is in every box, Rhoda, your father says, placing a hand on your shoulder. His grip is firm. You know how to explain the dosages. This is not a game. This is your duty. Quote, the journey north is a blur of rutted roads and nervous tension. You are part of a small convoy of supply wagons, a slow-moving artery feeding a body on the verge of collapse. The closer you get to New York, the more the air changes. The normal rhythms of the countryside are gone. Farms lie untended. Their owners fled. The roads are clogged with families heading west, their worldly possessions piled high on carts, their faces masks of grim panic. And moving against that tide are men heading east, boys really, with dusty muskets on their shoulders and a brittle bravado in their eyes, marching towards the fight. You arrive at the Brooklyn encampment at dusk, and it is nothing like you imagined. It is a city of canvas and raw earth, teeming with thousands of men. The air is thick with wood smoke, sweat, and a nervous energy so potent it feels like a physical force. It is chaos. Regiments from different colonies bicker over campsites. Officers shout contradictory orders. A group of boys from Connecticut, their faces still round with youth, are trying to cook a scrawny chicken over a sputtering fire, laughing too loudly. You see the raw material of Washington's army, and your stomach clenches. They are farmers and fishermen and shopkeepers, not soldiers. They are the men Dickinson grieved for. They are the men Adams was willing to sacrifice. You and Silas deliver your precious cargo to a large tent flying a hospital flag, set back from the main line of fortifications on a rise of land called Gowanus Heights. The surgeon in charge, a man named Bellows with exhausted eyes and perpetually stained hands, seizes the crates with a frantic gratitude. He barely glances at you before barking orders to his assistants. As night falls, the camp grows quieter, but the tension only sharpens. You can see the distant lights of the British fleet in the harbor. Hundreds of them, a silent, glittering promise of annihilation. You try to sleep in the back of the wagon, but the ground seems to hum, and every snap of a twig sounds like the tread of a hostile patrol. The world explodes at dawn, not with a single bang, but with a deep, earth-shaking roar that rattles your teeth. It's the British ships of the line, firing broadside after broadside at your fortifications. You scramble from the wagon, your heart hammering against your ribs. The sound is monstrous, a physical blow that you feel in your bones. The air fills with the shriek of cannonballs, the crack of splintering earthworks, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. From your vantage point on the heights, you can see parts of the battle unfold like a horrifying play. You see lines of American troops, their blue and brown coats, a stark contrast to the green fields, moving to meet an unseen enemy in the woods below. You see puffs of smoke from musket volleys, followed by the distant, popping sound of the shots. The battle is a confusing, terrifying mess. There are no clear lines, only pockets of savage fighting erupting and dying down all across the landscape. The plan, whatever it was, has clearly disintegrated. Then, the true horror begins. The trickle of wounded men coming back to the hospital tent becomes a stream, then a flood. They come stumbling out of the woods, their faces pale with shock, covered in blood and dirt. A boy with a shattered arm, holding it to his chest as if it were a broken doll. A man with a bayonet wound in his gut, being half carried by two comrades, his face a ghastly shade of gray. A grizzled farmer from Pennsylvania, his homespun shirt soaked in red, who simply sits down under a tree and stares into nothing, his mind broken by what he has seen. Surgeon Bellows and his few assistants are overwhelmed. They work in a desperate, bloody frenzy. The tent becomes a house of pain, filled with the sounds of sawing bone and the low, constant moans of the dying. You stand frozen at the edge of it all, useless, paralyzed. "Boy!" Bellows' voice cuts through your stupor. He points a bloody finger at you. "Don't just stand there gawking. Fetch water. Tear bandages. Hold him down." He shoves you towards a young man on a straw pallet whose leg is a ruin of blood and splintered bone. The world narrows to this single, terrible task. You kneel, your hands pressing down on the man's shoulders as Bellows works with a saw. The man screams, a raw, inhuman sound that will echo in your nightmares for the rest of your life. You feel his sweat. You smell his fear. And in that moment, the entire political debate of Adams and Dickinson becomes a meaningless abstraction. This is the cost. This is the butcher's bill Hancock spoke of, and you are helping to pay it. Suddenly, a new sound cuts through the din, a roar of British triumph from a direction you thought was safe. To your left, where the main road runs past an old stone house, you see them. Redcoats, pouring out of the woods behind your lines. They've flanked the army. It's a trap. A wave of panic rips through the camp. Militia units, their officers gone, their cohesion shattered, break and run. It's a rout. But then you see it, an act of such insane, breathtaking courage that it burns itself into your memory forever. A small contingent of American soldiers, less than 400 of them, their uniforms a distinctive blue and buff, do not run. They turn and face the entire British advance. They form a line and charge the stone house, which is now swarming with British regulars. It is suicide. You watch them charge, fire a volley, and fall back, only to reform and charge again, and again. They are buying time with their lives, holding the line just long enough for the thousands of other panicked soldiers to flee towards the river. You see their commander on a white horse, rallying them, leading them into the teeth of the cannons. You watch as men you saw laughing around a campfire last night are scythed down by disciplined volleys. It is the most terrible and magnificent thing you have ever seen. They are not fighting for victory. They are fighting for the lives of the men who are running away. They are the embodiment of Adams's iron will, and the very men Dickinson mourned before they had even fallen. They are ordinary men performing an extraordinary act, a single brilliant point of light in a universe of darkness and terror. The stand breaks, as it must. The few survivors are swarmed and captured. The battle is lost. The retreat is a chaotic scramble towards the ferry landing. You help Silas get the horses hitched to the wagon, your hands shaking, your mind numb. You join the desperate exodus, the wagon jostling alongside broken men and terrified boys. The air is filled with the cries of the wounded who have been left behind. Their voices follow you, a chorus of despair. That night is a silent, foggy hell. Washington has ordered a full evacuation. Under the cover of a miraculous fog that has rolled in, boat by boat, the broken army is ferried across the East River to Manhattan. The retreat is conducted in absolute silence. No one speaks. The only sounds are the gentle lapping of water against the hulls of the boats and the muffled creak of oarlocks. You stand on the shore, helping to guide men and horses onto the small craft. The sense of defeat, a thick, suffocating blanket. The courage of the morning feels like a distant dream. This is only shame and survival. As the sun rises, you are on the shore of Manhattan, looking back across the river. The fog lifts, revealing the Brooklyn shore lined with British soldiers, who let out a cheer of triumphant rage when they realize their prey has escaped. Fires burn across the abandoned American camp. You stare at the smoke, the reek of your failure drifting across the water. You did your duty. You delivered the medicine. But you also held down a screaming man while his leg was cut off. You watched a regiment of heroes sacrifice themselves for nothing more than a few precious minutes. You saw an army, an entire cause, come within a hair's breadth of being utterly extinguished. The world is not black and white, as Micah Walker believes. It is not a simple choice between patriots and cowards. It is a terrifying, messy, bloody gray. It is the color of a surgeon's hands, the color of a foggy river, the color of the smoke rising from a lost battlefield. You are still Rhoda Wright, son of an apothecary. But the naive boy who left Philadelphia is gone forever, lost somewhere in the smoke and screams of Long Island. In his place is a stranger, someone who now understands, in his very bones, the terrible, terrible price of a word like freedom. You make it back to Philadelphia, but you are not the same. The city itself feels different, infected by the defeat you witness firsthand. The nervous tension has curdled into a brittle, simmering panic. The retreat from Long Island is no longer a distant rumor. It is a raw, gaping wound. Refugees from New York now walk the streets, their faces hollow, their eyes carrying the same haunted look you see in the mirror. The committees of safety, once just officious bodies of local leaders, now act with the swift, hard authority of a military tribunal. Suspicion is a contagion, and the word Tory is a death sentence for a man's reputation, if not his life. For days you move through the apothecary in a fog. The rhythmic work of the pestle and mortar feels like a mockery. The smells of lavender and wintergreen cannot cover the phantom stench of gunpowder and gangrene that clings to your memory. You see the face of the screaming soldier on the operating table every time you close your eyes. You hear the final, defiant volleys of the Marylanders in every sudden noise on the street. Eleazar watches you, her usual sharp commentary softened by a worried pity. Your father gives you space, his quiet gaze full of a sorrow that acknowledges you have seen too much. One afternoon he hands you a small, wrapped bottle. "This is for Mr. Finch," he says, his voice gentle. "He lives on Elfreth's Alley. His wife's ague has returned. The walk will do you good, Rhoda. See the sky. Feel the sun." It is a transparent attempt to pull you from your waking nightmare, and you are too tired to argue. You take the bottle and step out into the humid late summer air. The city's sounds are sharp, frantic. A horse gallops past, its rider shouting news you can't make out. Two women on a street corner whisper anxiously, their hands clasped together. There is no joy here now, only a collective, city-wide clenching of the jaw, waiting for the next blow to fall. As you turn onto 2nd Street, you hear it, a low, angry rumble of voices. A small crowd has gathered in front of a draper's shop, its windows dark, its door firmly shut. The sign above reads, "Davies Fine Woolens and Silks." The crowd is not large, but it is ugly. It is made up of men whose anger, born of fear and defeat, is searching for a target. And at the center of it, directing it like a conductor, is Micah Walker. He looks even more formidable than he did at his forge. He is not sweating over an anvil now. He is lit by a cold, righteous fire. He stands before the draper's locked door, his fists planted on his hips, his square jaw set. "He's in there," Micah bellows, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Counting his money while the army starves for blankets. Praying to his German king while good men die in the mud. Davies, show your traitor's face!" A man in the crowd, a cooper with a leather apron, picks up a stone. "Let's open the door for him!" "No," Micah says, his voice dropping to a low growl that is somehow more commanding than his shout. He turns his head slightly, and his eyes, hard and unyielding as flint, sweep over the small mob. "We are not a rabble. We are patriots. We follow the law." He jabs a thumb towards two men from the Committee of Safety, who stand with him, their faces grim and official. He will answer to the committee. But he will see us. He will know that Philadelphia has no more room for his kind. Quote, "You stand across the narrow street, half hidden by the awning of a bakery, the small bottle for Mrs. Finch forgotten in your hand. This is what you fled from in New York, the chaos, the anger. But there is no river to cross here. This is home. Micah's gaze falls on you. There is no flicker of recognition, no camaraderie. His eyes are fixed on a single, brutal purpose. He sees only two types of people, those who stand with him and those who stand in his way. He turns back to the door and pounds on it with his massive fist. The wood shudders in its frame. "Elias Davies, by order of the Committee of Safety, you will open this door." For a long moment, there is only the sound of your own heart beating in your ears. Then, you hear the scrape of a bolt being drawn, and the door creaks open just a few inches. A man's face appears in the gap. He is older, perhaps your father's age, with thin, graying hair and spectacles perched on his nose. His face is pale, but his eyes, magnified by the lenses, are not fearful. They are filled with a weary, profound sadness. "This is Elias Davies. You've seen him at the market. He always had a kind word." "Micah," he says, his voice quiet but clear, carrying across the street. "What is the meaning of this spectacle? You are frightening my wife." "Your wife should be frightened," a woman in the crowd shrieks. "My son is in Fort Washington with nothing but a summer coat between him and the damp, and you sit on bolts of good English wool." "The wool is for my customers, Martha," Davies says, his voice strained but steady. "The same as it has always been. I am a shopkeeper. That is all I have ever been." Quote, "You are a loyalist." Micah spits the word like a curse. "You refused to accept continental currency. You toasted the king's health at the merchant's exchange. Do you deny it?" Quote, Davies looks not at Micah, but past him, his gaze sweeping over the angry faces, the frightened neighbors peering from their windows. He seems to be looking for a single face that holds reason, and finds none. His eyes meet yours for a brief, startling moment, and you feel a strange, unwilling connection, the recognition of one lost soul for another. "I do not deny that I am a loyal subject of the crown, no," Davies says, his voice gaining a measure of strength. "An oath is an oath. Is honor a trait you no longer value, Micah? I have built this business over 30 years under the protection of British law. That law has kept order. It has allowed this city to prosper. I have paid my taxes and lived in peace, and I will not throw that away for this." He gestures vaguely at the street, at the angry crowd, at the whole chaotic enterprise of rebellion. For mob rule, for a war started by hot-headed men in Boston who confuse their own ambition with God's will. Quote, his words fall into a stunned silence. You had expected denials, please. Instead, he offers a calm, reasoned defense of his entire world. "It's the world you grew up in, the one that now lies in shards at your feet." He is not speaking of a tyrant. He is speaking of order, of prosperity, of peace. The very things John Dickinson had argued for, but with a voice stripped of political calculation. This is the simple, personal truth of a man who believes the world he knew was better than the one being violently born. "The king protects us?" Micah scoffs, a harsh, ugly sound. "Tell that to the men of Boston, with soldiers quartered in their homes. Tell that to the farmers at Lexington. He protects his own power, with taxes and with guns. He has sent Hessian mercenaries, hired killers, to slaughter his own subjects. That is not law, Davies. That is tyranny. And any man who licks the hand that holds the whip is a traitor to his own people." Quote, "You are my people, Micah," Davies says, and for the first time, a tremor enters his voice. The sadness in his eyes deepens. "I have known you since you were a boy. I sold your father the cloth for your first good suit. And now you stand at my door, ready to tear my life apart because my conscience will not bend to yours? Is that the liberty you fight for? The freedom to destroy any man who disagrees with you?" Quote, you flinch. The question hangs in the air, aimed at Micah but striking you with the force of a physical blow. You think of the cooper reaching for a stone. You think of the casual cruelty you've seen directed at Quakers and suspected Tories. You remember Dickinson's haunted question, what good is a victory that leaves us a nation of ruins? Maybe the ruins weren't just the buildings but the bonds between neighbors, the very idea of a community. The two men from the committee step forward, pushing Micah gently aside. "That's enough," one says, his voice flat. "Elias Davies, you are to come with us. The committee has questions for you regarding your business practices and your suspected aid to the enemy." Quote, Davies slowly opens the door fully. He straightens his waistcoat and adjusts his spectacles with a hand that trembles slightly. He looks at his shop, at the neat bolts of cloth visible in the gloom, a life's work about to be undone. He gives a curt, dignified nod. As he steps out into the street, the crowd presses in, jeering, calling him King's Man and coward. He does not look at them. He keeps his gaze straight ahead, a small, lonely island of quiet dignity in a sea of hate. As he is led away, Micah Walker turns. His gaze finds you again across the street, and this time he holds it. He saw where you were looking. He saw the conflict on your face as Davies spoke. He walks towards you, the crowd parting before him. He stops just a few feet away, his shadow falling over you. You heard him, Micah says. It is not a question. A man of conscience. He says the words with a deep, biting sarcasm. His conscience keeps good wool from our soldiers' backs. His order has them shot down by foreign hirelings. There is no middle ground, boy. Not anymore. The battle in New York should have taught you that. You stand with us, or you stand with them. His choice was to stand with them. He looks down at the bottle in your hand. Go on, he grunts. Deliver your potions. But remember that man's face. That is the face of the enemy within, and they are more dangerous than 1,000 redcoats. He turns and stalks away, leaving you in the sudden, ringing silence of the aftermath. The crowd disperses, muttering, their anger spent, leaving only a residue of ugliness in the air. You look at the draper's shop, its door now hanging slightly ajar. A dark, violated mouth. You think of Mr. Davies's quiet, desperate question. Is that the liberty you fight for? You don't have an answer. All you have is the memory of one man's absolute certainty and another's profound sorrow. You have the memory of heroic sacrifice and terrified flight. You have the weight of your father's medicines in your hand and the weight of Micah's lead hidden under your floor. The battle lines, which once seemed so clear, have blurred into an incomprehensible, painful mess. There are no heroes here on this street corner. There are only victims of a storm that is consuming them all. You have seen the cost of war. Now you have seen the cost of choosing peace. And you are no longer sure which is greater. The bottle for Mrs. Finch feels impossibly small in your hand. A tiny, fragile vessel of healing in a city sick with hate. You deliver it, your movements automatic, your mind still replaying the scene in front of the draper's shop. The quiet dignity of Elias Davies. The terrifying certainty in Micah Walker's eyes. You walk back through the deepening twilight, the streets emptying as a cold, wet wind begins to blow from the north, carrying with it the smell of snow and bad news. The days that follow grow shorter and colder, mirroring the news that trickles into the city. Washington's army, your army, is not an army at all anymore. It is a ghost, haunted and hunted across the frozen fields of New Jersey. They abandoned Fort Washington, then Fort Lee. They are in full retreat, a desperate scramble towards the relative safety of the Delaware River, with General Howe's red-coated legions snapping at their heels. The word on everyone's lips is collapse. The great experiment, proclaimed with such joy and bell ringing just a few months ago, seems to be bleeding out in the winter mud. Your father's shop is a sanctuary of warmth and familiar smells, but it feels different now. The conversations with customers are hushed, furtive. People come for sleeping drafts and nerve tonics, their eyes wide with a fear that is no longer abstract. The British are coming. It is no longer a question of if, but when. The Congress, the very body that had declared independence with such bravado, quietly packs its papers and flees Philadelphia for the safer confines of Baltimore. Their departure is a silent scream of panic that echoes through every street. One evening, as you, your father, and Eleazar sit down to a meager meal of stew, a frantic knocking rattles the front door of the shop. Your father answers it to find a man from the New Pennsylvania Council of Safety, his face chapped raw by the wind, his breath coming in white plumes. "Master Wright," he says, his voice urgent. "General Washington has crossed the Delaware. What's left of his army is camped near Newtown. They are in a bad way, sick, freezing, without shoes. We are gathering everything we can. Every blanket, every strip of linen, every drop of medicine." His eyes find yours. "We need wagons, and we need men who know what's in them." Quote, your father looks at you. There is no debate this time, no gentle prodding. His expression is grim, resolute. The time for deliberation is over. This is a matter of survival. Eleazar, her face pale, simply nods. She rises from the table and begins gathering canvas bags. The decision has been made for you all. The journey is a descent into a frozen hell. You ride beside Silas, the same stern carter. but the mood is entirely different. The road is a churned track of frozen mud and ice. The wind is a physical enemy, a razor that cuts through your woolen coat and seems to aim for the marrow of your bones. The world is leached of all color, a stark landscape of skeletal trees, gray skies, and fields dusted with a cruel, thin layer of snow. There are no cheering crowds, no defiant boys marching to war. There are only abandoned farmhouses, their windows like vacant eyes, and the grim evidence of a headlong retreat. A broken cannon carriage half sunk in a frozen creek, a discarded knapsack, a single, solitary shoe lying in the road. You find what is left of the Continental Army huddled along the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware River. It is not an army, it is a gathering of phantoms. A few thousand men, their faces gaunt and smeared with grime, their uniforms in tatters. They are wrapped in thin blankets, scraps of canvas, even pieces of old carpets. Many have rags tied around their feet, leaving bloody tracks in the snow. They huddle around sputtering, smoky fires, their shoulders hunched against a wind that offers no mercy. The silence is what gets you. It's not the quiet of discipline, but the hollow silence of utter exhaustion and despair. You and Silas pull the wagon into the heart of this misery. A surgeon, even more haggard than Bellows in Brooklyn, his hands shaking with cold, directs you to a large barn that serves as a hospital. As you begin to unload the crates of salves and bandages, you see the reality of the cost Dickinson spoke of. The barn is filled with the ragged shapes of men, not wounded by bullets, but felled by dysentery, pneumonia, and frostbite. Their coughing is a constant, wet, racking sound. The smell is of sickness and dying. You work for hours, your fingers numb, your own misery forgotten in the face of this overwhelming suffering. You help a grim-faced Eleazar, who has somehow appeared from another supply wagon, her practicality, a small, solid rock in this sea of despair. You dole out tincture of cinchona to men shivering with fever. You hand out rolls of her perfectly cut bandages. You pour hot, weak broth into tin cups held by trembling hands. The gratitude in their eyes is a painful thing to witness. Later, seeking a moment's respite from the barn, you walk through the camp. The sun is a pale, useless disk in the sky. You see a group of men huddled together, their backs to the wind. One of them is the young cooper's boy you saw enlist with such pride. His face is now thin and old, his eyes sunk deep in their sockets. He has no shoes, only bloody rags wrapped around his feet. He's trying to chew on a piece of hard, moldy bread. He looks up and sees you, and for a moment there's no recognition, then a flicker. "Wright's boy," he rasps, his voice a dry whisper. "The apothecary." Quote, you can only nod, a lump forming in your throat. Are you well? The question is an absurdity. He gives a short, barking laugh that turns into a coughing fit. Well, as a man can be, I suppose. Still breathing. That's more than Tom and Samuel can say. He looks down at his feet. At least the ground is hard. In Jersey, every step was like pulling your foot out of a cold, wet grave. Quote, another soldier, an older man with a matted beard and the fierce eyes of a cornered animal, spits onto the snow. And for what? To run. All we've done is run. Some say it's over. Congress has run too. Quote, you expect agreement, a chorus of despair. Instead, a third man, barely more than a boy, who has been trying to whittle a piece of frozen wood with a knife held in stiff fingers, speaks up. His voice is quiet but surprisingly firm. The general's still here. It's not a challenge, it's a simple statement of fact. The other men fall silent. The cooper's boy nods slowly. Aye, the general's still here. It's an anchor, a single point of certainty in a world that has dissolved into chaos. You look around the miserable camp, at these broken, freezing men, and you start to see it. It's not in grand gestures. It's in the way a soldier shares the last inch of his filthy blanket with a shivering comrade. It's in the dark humor they use to keep the terror at bay. It's in the cooper's boy, who, despite everything, carefully wraps his piece of bread and tucks it away for later. It is a stubborn, mulish, almost incomprehensible refusal to quit. This is not the righteous, fire-breathing patriotism of Micah Walker. This is something quieter, deeper, and infinitely stronger. It's a resilience born not of anger, but of endurance. They have been beaten, starved, and frozen. They have seen their friends die. They have lost every battle. And yet, they are still here. They persist. It's the same stubbornness you feel when wrestling with a difficult root in the mortar, magnified 1,000 times, and turned to the impossible task of birthing a nation. As dusk falls, casting long blue shadows across the snow, you see him, General Washington. He is on foot, not on a fine horse, walking through the camp. He is taller than you expected, and the weight of the world seems to rest on his broad shoulders. His face is grim, etched with care, but his eyes miss nothing. He stops to speak with the group of soldiers, the cooper's boy among them. He doesn't make a speech. He asks them how they are, where they are from. He looks at the boy's ruined feet, and a flicker of profound pain crosses his face. He says something too low for you to hear, and claps the boy on the shoulder before moving on. It is not the act of a general, it is the act of a father visiting his sick children. You watch as he moves through the camp, his presence a silent current that seems to pull the men straighter, to quiet their complaints, to rekindle a tiny flickering ember of hope in their exhausted eyes. He is not a creature of the storm like Adams, he is the eye of the storm, the calm, unyielding center around which the entire desperate enterprise revolves. You finally understand this is what it takes, not just the fire of conviction, but the cold, hard endurance to see it through the winter. It's the willingness to stand on the frozen riverbank when everyone else has fled, to face defeat after defeat, and to simply remain. To persist. To believe that spring will eventually come. Standing there in the biting wind, the smell of wood smoke in your nostrils, you feel the naive boy you were, the one who dreamed of being a ship's captain, finally and completely die. He is replaced by someone who understands that the most important voyages are not across oceans, but across the frozen landscapes of doubt and despair. You look at the hidden lead under your father's floorboards in your mind's eye. It is not just lead for bullets anymore. It is the physical embodiment of this weight, this grim, stubborn persistence. It is the price of a chance. And looking at the ragged, freezing, indomitable men of the Continental Army, you realize for the first time that it might be a price worth paying. The journey back to Philadelphia is a silent retreat through a world stripped of color and sound. The ruts in the road are frozen solid, and the rhythmic clatter of the wagon wheels is a hollow, lonely percussion against the vast, gray silence of the winter landscape. The ghost army you left huddled on the banks of the Delaware haunts every mile. You see their faces in the gnarled bark of trees, hear their desperate, racking coughs in the sigh of the wind. When you finally rattle across the cobbled streets of home, the city feels like a stranger. The familiar hustle has been replaced by a furtive quiet. People hurry along the streets with their heads down, their collars pulled high, as if the northern wind carries the infection of defeat. The apothecary, when you step inside, is a haven of warmth, but the air is different. The usual scents of lavender and cinchona are thin, overwhelmed by the sharp, medicinal smell of carbolic wash. Your father looks up from his ledger, and the relief in his eyes is quickly followed by a deep, pained understanding as he takes in your appearance, the grime on your face, the new, old look in your eyes. He simply nods, a silent acknowledgement that you have crossed a threshold from which there is no return. Eleazar is there, wiping down the counter with a cloth. She looks at you, and her usual practicality is a comfort, but you see the strain around her eyes. They ran out of honey, she says, her voice flat. The whole city had to give Mrs. Gable's boy horehound and vinegar for his croup, he cried. It is her way of saying the world is falling apart. In the days that follow, you learn the true language of war. It is not spoken in the grand declarations of Congress or the furious debates of men like Adams. It is spoken in the quiet, devastating silences that fall in your shop. It is the language of loss. Mrs. Gable comes in, her face hidden behind a thick veil, and places a black-bordered card on the counter. Her husband, who spoke of loyalty to the king, was arrested shortly after Elias Davies. He died of jail fever in the Walnut Street prison, just a few hundred yards from his own home. She does not weep. She just stands there, a statue of grief, as you wrap a bottle of laudanum for her. Her coins are cold on the counter. War is the knock on the door that comes in the middle of the afternoon. It's the cooper's wife, the mother of the boy you saw at the camp. She has heard you were there. She comes to the shop, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron into knots. "You saw my Daniel?" she asks, her voice a raw whisper, her eyes so full of desperate hope. It's like looking into the sun. You swallow, the lump in your throat feeling like a stone. You choose your words with the care of a surgeon probing a wound. I did, ma'am. He was tired. And cold. But he was alive. He was with his friends. You do not tell her about the bloody rags on his feet. You do not tell her about the haunted, vacant look in his eyes. You give her the only medicine you have, a carefully edited, fragile piece of the truth. She closes her eyes, and a single tear escapes, tracing a path through the flower dust on her cheek. "Thank you," she whispers. "God bless you, son. Thank you." She leaves without buying anything. She came only for that single precious morsel of hope, and you pray to a God you are no longer sure you believe in, that it does not poison her when the real news comes. 2 weeks later, it does. A list is posted at the London coffee house. A list of the dead and captured from the fighting in New York. Daniel's name is on it. Under killed, Eleazar is the one who tells you, her voice devoid of all emotion as she reads from a neighbor's copy of the list. That evening, you watch from the shop window as the women of the neighborhood walk in a silent procession to the Cooper's house, each carrying something. A small loaf of bread, a jar of pickled beets, a bundle of firewood. They do not knock. They just leave their offerings on the doorstep, small tokens of a shared, unutterable sorrow. The war is in the things that are missing, the dwindling supplies on your own shelves, the empty storefront of Davis's drapery, its windows now boarded over, a scar on the face of the street. It is in the faces of the children, who no longer play noisily in the alleys but huddle in doorways, their games forgotten. The entire city is holding its breath, waiting for the British to cross the river and occupy them, to end the uncertainty with the grim finality of conquest. Yet, in this vacuum of despair, something new begins to grow. It is quiet and stubborn. It is the strength of a community that has been stripped of everything but each other. Your apothecary, once a place of commerce, becomes something else. A public square, a confessional, a sanctuary. The back room where you once dreamed of escaping your duties is now constantly filled with the quiet rustle and hum of the neighborhood women. Led by Eleazar, they have turned it into a small factory for the war effort. But it is more than that. They sit on stools and crates, scraping lint, rolling bandages, and knitting woolen socks from scraps of yarn. And as they work, they talk. They share news, whispered from letters that have miraculously made it through. They trade recipes for making a single chicken feed a family of 6. They offer comfort to a woman whose son has not been heard from in a month. They cry together, and then they bully each other into drinking hot tea and continuing their work. Eleazar is their general. Her sharp tongue has softened into a tool of encouragement. Her practicality is the rock they all cling to. "Crying won't keep your boy's feet warm, Sarah," you hear her say to a weeping woman. "Knitting will. Now, here's more yarn." She sees a need, and she fills it, with a brisk efficiency that is its own form of love. You watch her, your cousin, and you see a strength you never recognized, forged in the crucible of this long, cold winter. You find your own place in this new ecosystem. You are no longer just an apprentice. You are a conduit for information, a keeper of secrets, a quiet witness. You learn to listen. You listen to an old man's fears that his pension from the crown will be worthless, and you nod without judgment. You listen to a young wife read a letter from her husband, his words full of false bravado that doesn't quite cover the fear, and you offer her a cup of chamomile tea. You are the steady hand that measures the medicine, the calm voice that explains the dosage. You cannot stop the war. You cannot heal a bayonet wound. But you can soothe a child's cough. You can ease a grieving mother's pain with a sleeping draught. You can offer a moment of order and care in a world that has descended into chaos. Each act of grinding a root, of mixing a salve, becomes a small act of defiance. It is your answer to the cannons across the river. It is your argument against the despair that threatens to swallow the city whole. You are not forging bayonets like Micah Walker. You are not fighting for the soul of the nation with thunderous words like John Adams. You are fighting for its body, one fever at a time. This is your choice. This is your battlefront. One evening, as a fresh blanket of snow muffles the city in a profound quiet, you stand in the back room with Eleazar, packing another crate. This one is not for the army. It is a collection from the neighborhood. Socks, dried fruit, a few precious blankets, to be smuggled to the American prisoners held in the city's jails. Micah Walker wouldn't approve, you say quietly, tucking a pair of woolen mittens beside a jar of antiseptic balm. He'd say some of these men are deserters, cowards. Eliezer doesn't look up from the bandage she is rolling with practiced precision. Micah Walker can warm himself with his own righteousness, she says, her voice tight. A man's politics don't matter when he's freezing to death. A man is just a man, and he is cold. And he is one of ours. She ties off the roll and places it in the crate. Her words are as simple and as solid as the cobblestones outside. In that moment, she seems to possess a wisdom far older and more profound than any of the great men you've overheard. It is the wisdom of survival, of empathy, of a community refusing to let the poison of war destroy its heart. You look around the small candlelit room. You see the piles of lint, soft as new-fallen snow. You see the half-finished socks, the neatly packed crates. You feel the immense, unspoken weight of all the city's losses, but you also feel the astonishing, resilient strength of the people who remain. They have not been broken. They have bent, they have grieved, but they have not broken. They are weaving a new kind of society from the threads of their shared suffering. The bell on the shop door is silent. The distant clang of a forge is long cold. There is only the wind outside and the quiet, steady work of your hands inside. You are part of it now, this stubborn conspiracy of kindness. And you understand that this is how you win. Not with a single glorious battle, but by surviving the winter together. You place the final pair of knitted mittens into the crate, arranging them beside a small, tightly corked bottle of your father's strongest pain-relieving liniment. The warmth from the single candle on the workbench casts long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the hanging bunches of dried herbs look like sleeping bats. Outside, the world has gone silent, buried under a thick, clean blanket of snow. For the first time in months, Philadelphia feels peaceful. But it is the peace of an exhausted patient, not a healthy man. A fragile, temporary quiet. You look across the crate at Eliezer. Her words hang in the still, cold air between you. A man is just a man. And he is cold. And he is one of ours. It is so simple, so unadorned with the furious rhetoric of men like Adams, or the weary intellectualism of men like Dickinson. It is a truth that fits in the palm of your hand, solid and real, like a smooth river stone. The road ahead. You can't help but see it stretching out from this small, candlelit room into an endless, dark winter. The year is dying, and with it perhaps the dream of a new nation. You think back to the start of it all, to that impossibly distant, sun-drenched afternoon when your greatest trial was a stubborn sassafras root. How simple life was. How clear. You were Rhoda Wright, the apothecary's son, a boy with foolish dreams of the sea. Now, you are still Rhoda Wright, but the title feels heavier, the dreams long since packed away like summer clothes. The future is a terrifying blank. You have seen the best the Continental Army has to offer, and you saw it get shattered and swept away like so much driftwood. You have seen the fear in the faces of your neighbors and the grim determination of the women in this very room, and you know that courage alone does not stop musket balls. The British Army, a vast, disciplined machine of war, sits just across the river, waiting for the ice to thicken enough to walk across and put an end to this whole messy affair. When you think of that, a cold knot tightens in your gut. What will happen to your father? To Eliezer? To the cooper's wife, who has already lost so much? What will happen to a city that dared to defy a king? You look at your hands, stained with the faint scents of gentian and myrrh. They are not the hands of a soldier or a statesman. They are the hands of a healer. But what can you heal? You cannot mend the broken trust between neighbors like Micah Walker and Elias Davies. You cannot bring back the dead boy whose mother still weeps behind her shutters. You cannot erase the memory of a man's screams as his leg is sawn from his body. The sickness that has infected this land is too deep, the wound too grievous for any poultice you could ever mix. The road ahead seems to lead only to more loss, more fear, more of the quiet, agonizing goodbyes that have become the city's daily bread. And yet, you look again at the crate. It is filled with small, tangible acts of hope. A pair of socks, knitted by the trembling hands of a woman whose own husband is a prisoner. A small bag of dried apples, saved from a family's winter stores. A bandage roll, made from a child's outgrown linen shirt. These are not grand gestures. They are not declarations to be read from a balcony or arguments to be thundered in a hall. They are quiet, stubborn, and deeply human. They are the seeds of something new being sown in the frozen ground of despair. You realize that you have been looking for hope in the wrong places. You looked for it in the glorious peal of the Liberty Bell, only to find it followed by the roar of cannons. You looked for it in the fiery speeches of patriots, only to see that same fire turn on their neighbors. You looked for it in the desperate courage of soldiers, only to watch them die for a few more minutes of retreat. But the real hope, the kind that might actually survive this long winter, is not loud or glorious at all. It is here, in this room. It is in Eliezer, who sees a cold man, not a political symbol. It is in your father, who asks no questions about the dwindling supplies being packed into this crate, his silence a form of deep and unwavering trust. It is in the women who gather here, who have taken their grief and fear and knitted it into something warm and useful. They have built a new kind of government in this back room, one that runs on empathy and shared sacrifice. Its only law is the one Eliezer spoke. He is one of ours. This, you understand, is the real independence. It is not a word on a piece of parchment. It is the action of a people learning to rely on themselves, on each other. It is the freedom to choose compassion over suspicion, to choose community over chaos. The king is across the ocean, the Congress has fled to Baltimore, and the army is a frozen ghost. But the people are still here. And they are looking after their own. You think of the men you saw at the camp. The cooper's boy with his ruined feet. The old soldier, bitter with defeat. And the young man who answered them, his voice quiet but firm. The general's still here. It was not a statement of military strategy. It was an article of faith. A belief that as long as one person refused to quit, the cause was not lost. Perhaps that is all it takes. A stubborn refusal to be broken. A quiet determination to get up one more time than you are knocked down. It is the most infuriating and noble trait of the people you have come to know. The same stubbornness that makes you grind a root until it is a perfect powder. They have taken that simple, mulish instinct and aimed it at an empire. It seems an absurd, impossible fight. But as you stand here in the warm, candlelit quiet, surrounded by these small acts of defiant hope, it no longer feels entirely impossible. The war is not over. The road ahead is long, and it will surely be stained with more blood and more tears. You do not know if you will live to see the end of it. You do not know if the nation these people are trying to build will survive its own birth, but you know that the fight has changed you. It has burned away your childish daydreams and replaced them with a purpose you can feel in your bones. You are a healer. And your patient is a whole city, a whole country, sick with the fever of war. Your job is not to win the battles, but to help your people survive them. You reach into your own pocket and pull out a small tin. It contains a salve you made yourself from beeswax and comfrey root, excellent for soothing chapped skin and minor wounds. It is your best work. You tuck it carefully into a corner of the crate. A small, anonymous contribution. A piece of yourself, sent out into the cold. Eliezer looks up, a rare, small smile touching the corner of her mouth. She doesn't need to say anything. You both understand. This is the work. This is the way forward. One act of kindness at a time, smuggled through the darkness. It is a long road, but for the first time, you feel you are not just standing in its path, but walking it, with your eyes wide open, ready for whatever comes next. The journey does not end with a thunderous battle or a decisive victory. It ends here, in the quiet of a winter's night, with a simple act of shared humanity. You close the lid of the crate, the sound soft and final in the still room. Eliezer blows out the candle, plunging the back room into a darkness that is no longer frightening, but peaceful. In the faint, silvery light filtering through the shop window from the snow-covered street, you can just make out the shape of her, a sturdy, unmovable silhouette. For a long moment you both just stand there, breathing in the cold, clean air, two quiet soldiers in a war fought with balms and blankets. The last days of 1776 pass in a hush. The snow muffles the city, softening its sharp, anxious edges. The threat across the river remains, a vast, sleeping dragon, but its presence feels less immediate, held at bay by the profound quiet of the winter. The news that eventually filters through is so astonishing, so utterly unexpected, that at first no one dares to believe it. On Christmas night, in the midst of a blinding winter storm, General Washington and his ghost army crossed the frozen Delaware back into New Jersey. They fell upon the Hessian garrison at Trenton like vengeful spirits, a sudden, shocking whirlwind of steel and fury. A victory. A small, desperate, impossible victory. It is not a turning point that changes the course of the war overnight, but it is a spark. A single, defiant spark struck in the darkest, coldest moment of the year. You hear the news whispered in the shop, repeated with a cautious, fragile hope. It does not erase the losses or mend the grief, but it changes the air. The city, which had been holding its breath in anticipation of its own funeral, slowly, tentatively, begins to breathe again. The fight is not over. But for now, you have survived the winter. You find yourself standing behind the counter, the place where it all began. The familiar weight of the pestle is in your hand, but you are not grinding. You are just holding it. Its cool, smooth stone, a connection to the boy you once were. You look around the shop, at the rows of glass bottles, at the bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters. It is all the same, and yet everything is different, because you are different. The world outside these walls is no longer just noise. It has a face, it has a name, it has a cost. You think of John Adams and John Dickinson, the two poles of the argument that tore the world apart. You once saw them as simple opposites, fire and water, war and peace. Now you see them as two sides of the same terrible coin. You have seen Adams' righteous fire in the suicidal courage of the Maryland soldiers, a glorious, horrifying blaze that bought an army a few more minutes of life. And you have felt Dickinson's profound sorrow in the groans of the dying in the surgeon's tent, in the hollow eyes of the cooper's wife. You understand now that they were both right. To declare independence was a leap into an abyss, a terrifying act of faith that demanded a price in blood and iron. And the price was sickeningly high. There was no clean choice, no righteous path without ruin. The only choice was what kind of ruin you were willing to endure for the chance of something new. And what of the people caught in the storm? You think of Micah Walker, his face lit by the forge fire, his certainty as hard and unyielding as the bayonets he created. You understand his anger now, the desperate need to see the world in black and white when the gray is so filled with pain. He is not a villain. He is a man who saw a threat and chose to become a weapon to meet it. Then you see the sad, dignified face of Elias Davies, a man whose only crime was to believe in the world that was, not the one that was struggling to be born. His loyalty was not to a distant tyrant, but to order, to a life he understood. And for that, he was destroyed. The tragedy, you realize, is that Micah and Elias were neighbors. They were part of the same city, the same people, until the storm taught them to see each other as enemies. You see Eleazar, her face a mask of grim efficiency, tearing sheets into perfect bandage rolls. You had always seen her as simple, practical. But you now know her practicality is a form of courage, her clear-eyed compassion a force more formidable than any army. She did not debate the grand ideas. She simply saw a neighbor who was cold, a soldier who was sick, and she acted. She taught you that the foundation of a nation is not built on speeches, but on the small, stubborn bonds of community, on the simple, revolutionary idea that we are responsible for one another. He is one of ours. And what of you, Rhoda Wright? The boy who dreamed of adventure found it not on the high seas, but in a bloody barn in Brooklyn. The boy who hated the tedious work of the apothecary found his purpose in it. You did not fire a musket. You did not sign a declaration. But you held a screaming man down. You gave a mother a fragile piece of hope. You packed a crate with mittens and salves. You learned that heroism is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet, stubborn refusal to let despair have the final word. Sometimes it is just showing up, day after day, to do the work that needs to be done. You take a deep, slow breath, and the sharp scent of cinchona bark and dried lavender seems to thin, to fade. The memory of the distant, rhythmic clang of a hammer from a forge grows faint, like an echo from a long-forgotten dream. The cold draft from under the door no longer feels like the wind off the Delaware, but simply a chill in the room. The weight of the pestle in your hand dissolves. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeam are no longer tiny rebels, but just dust. The air in the apothecary shop, thick with the ghosts of 1776, gradually thins until it is just the air in your own room, quiet and still. The journey is over. You can relax now. Let the tension in your shoulders release. Let the echoes of the past fall silent. You have stood in the heart of the storm. You have seen how a nation is not born in a single, glorious moment, but forged slowly, painfully, in the fires of countless small, personal choices. It is forged in the clash of ideals, in the stubbornness of ordinary people, and in the quiet courage required to survive the winter. History is not a clean, simple story of heroes and villains. It is a messy, complicated, and deeply human affair, lived by people who were just as confused and frightened and hopeful as we are. They didn't know they were living in a historic year. For them, it was just a Tuesday. A confusing, terrifying, and utterly life-altering Tuesday. The sacrifice was real. The courage was breathtaking. And the hope, the fragile, battered hope for a better future, endured. It survived the winter of 1776, and it has been passed down through generations, a quiet legacy in our very bones. Thank you for walking that road with me tonight. The world of Rhoda Wright, of Adams and Dickinson, of a city holding its breath on the precipice of a new world, now fades back into the pages of history. I hope you found a quiet space here, a moment to reflect. Rest easy now. The fire in the forge has gone out, the bells are silent, and the snow has covered the old footprints. All is quiet. All is well.